There is a moment in every market, in every room, and in every life when the crowd moves away from something and the wise man moves toward it. That gap between where the crowd goes and where the opportunity lives, that is where everything I know was learned. Fear is the most reliable signal I have ever encountered. Not because fear is always wrong, but because fear is always loud. And when something becomes loud, it becomes mispriced. And when something is mispriced, it becomes an opportunity for those who are quiet enough to hear what is actually happening beneath the noise. I have watched this my entire life. I watched it in markets, I watched it in boardrooms, I watched it in families. The mechanism is always the same. A crowd of people, all feeling the same emotion at the same time, all making the same decision in the same direction, and in doing so, creating a gap so wide and so obvious that a patient man could walk through it slowly, calmly, and build something extraordinary on the other side. But here is what most people miss. The gap is not the hard part. The hard part is the silence required to see it. Most people cannot be quiet enough. They are surrounded by the noise of other people's opinions, other people's timelines, other people's fear. And so they join the crowd, not because they believe the crowd is right, but because the crowd is loud, and being alone in the opposite direction requires a kind of psychological strength that is almost never discussed and almost never taught. I want to talk about that strength today, because I believe it is the foundation of everything. Not spreadsheets, not formulas, not market timing. The foundation is the ability to sit in silence while the world around you panics, and to trust what you see when no one else can see it yet. I grew up watching people who had very little money behave as if money were a foreign language they could never learn. They talked about it in hushed tones. They treated it as something that happened to other people, and when money arrived in their lives, briefly, through a bonus or a windfall, they spent it quickly as if it were dangerous to hold. I did not understand this at first, but over time I came to understand it deeply. People who grow up without financial stability carry a relationship with money that is built entirely on fear, not greed. Fear. The fear that it will leave, the fear that they do not deserve it, the fear that if others see it, something bad will happen, and so they spend it before it can disappear on its own. They give it away before someone can take it. They shrink themselves financially because staying small feels safer than being seen. This pattern does not belong only to people with little money. I have watched billionaires destroy themselves with the same psychology. The scale changes, the fear does not. What I learned, slowly and through many mistakes, is that wealth is not primarily a mathematical problem. It is a psychological one. The numbers are secondary. The mind is primary. And the mind, left unexamined, will always find a way to return to what feels familiar, even if what feels familiar is scarcity. This is why the first and most important investment any person can make is not in a stock or a property or a business. It is in the understanding of their own mind. What do you believe money means? What do you believe success reveals about a person? What do you believe happens to people who have too much? Until you answer those questions honestly, you are building wealth on a foundation that will quietly work against everything you construct. I am not speaking abstractly. I have seen extraordinarily intelligent people, people who understood markets and economics better than most, systematically undermine their own financial lives because of beliefs they never examined. Beliefs inherited from their parents, beliefs absorbed from their culture, beliefs reinforced by the environments they chose to stay inside. The most dangerous beliefs are the ones that feel like wisdom, the ones that sound noble and responsible, but are really just fear wearing a more acceptable costume. There is a darkness in human nature that the world of wealth forces you to confront eventually, and the sooner you confront it, the better equipped you become. The darkness is envy, not your envy, necessarily, though that is worth examining too. The envy of others. I learned early that visibility is not an asset. In certain contexts, in certain stages of life and wealth, visibility is a liability. When people can see what you have, something shifts in them. Not in all people, but in enough people that it changes the dynamics of every relationship in your orbit. Envy is not the same as jealousy. Jealousy wants what you have. Envy wants to take it from you, or failing that, wants you not to have it either. Envy is not rational. It does not respond to fairness or logic. It is a primitive emotion, and like all primitive emotions, it operates beneath the surface of polite behavior. People experiencing envy rarely know they are experiencing it. They experience it as moral outrage, as concern, as criticism, as unsolicited advice, as a sudden belief that you got lucky or did something wrong. I have watched people I trusted deeply change their behavior toward me not because I changed, but because my circumstances changed in ways they could see. The friendship that existed in one financial context became something more complicated in another. Not because the person was a bad person, but because envy does not ask permission before it arrives. This taught me something I have never forgotten. Protect the peace of your relationships by not placing them under pressures they cannot hold. When you broadcast what you have, you are not sharing, you are testing. And some relationships will fail that test through no fault of their own, simply because human nature contains this shadow that none of us fully escapes. The wisest people I have known did not display what they had, not out of shame, not out of false modesty, but out of a genuine understanding of human psychology and a desire to keep their world clean of the complications that visibility brings. There is a particular kind of loneliness in visible success that I do not think is discussed enough. The loneliness of not knowing who is with you because of who you are and who is with you because of what you represent. The loneliness of wondering in quiet moments whether the respect people show you is for the person or the position. This is the tax that visibility levies on the wealthy, and it is not small. The alternative is not to pretend you have nothing. The alternative is to simply not volunteer information that serves no one and costs you everything. I want to describe something I have come to call the shadow discipline. It is not a technique. It is not a strategy in the tactical sense. It is a way of moving through the world that preserves your advantage, protects your energy, and compounds your results over time in ways that no single investment decision ever could. The shadow discipline begins with understanding that information is the most valuable asset you will ever hold, not information you gather from others. Information others do not have about you. Every time you reveal your financial position, you change the game you are playing. Sometimes in small ways, sometimes in catastrophic ways, but always something shifts. The person receiving that information now has leverage they did not have before. Not necessarily leverage they will use against you, but leverage that exists. And in my experience, leverage that exists eventually gets used because people are human and humans respond to pressure and incentive in ways they themselves cannot always predict. I learned this the hard way, as most lessons worth learning are learned. There was a time when I was more open about my thinking, my positions, my next moves. I believed transparency was a form of generosity. I believed sharing created trust. And in some relationships, it does. But in the context of wealth, the economy, and the competitive nature of the systems we operate in, transparency is often just exposure dressed in virtuous language. The consequence of that openness was not dramatic. It was quiet. Small shifts in how certain people position themselves relative to my interests. Slight adjustments in negotiation dynamics, a sense over time that the information I had shared freely had been used, not maliciously, but instrumentally, by people who had their own interests to protect. After that, I became more careful, not secretive, not paranoid, careful. The distinction matters. Secrecy comes from fear. Carefulness comes from understanding. I did not withhold information because I was afraid. I withheld it because I understood its value. You do not give away your most valuable asset for free. Not your time, not your knowledge, not your next move. There's a number I have never said out loud in public, not because I am embarrassed by it, not because I am hiding anything legally or ethically, but because the moment that number exists in someone else's mind, it begins to do things I cannot control. It creates a ceiling in how people see what is possible for you. It creates a floor in what they think you owe the world. It changes the nature of every request made to you and every offer extended. It changes the texture of rooms you walk into and conversations you begin. It reduces you from a person to a figure, and figures are not treated the way people are treated. I know people who have shared their net worth publicly, either through interviews or through the kind of casual disclosure that feels harmless in the moment. Every single one of them described changes in their relationships they did not anticipate and would not have chosen. Everyone. There is a predatory intelligence that activates in people when they know what you are worth. It does not belong only to bad people. It is simply the mathematics of human behavior in the presence of asymmetric information. If someone knows what you have and you do not know what they want, they hold an advantage that colors everything. I keep my number to myself. I have kept it to myself for decades. The peace that comes from that restraint is something I would not trade for any amount of credibility or attention. And I will tell you something else. The people who matter most in your life, the people whose respect and love you actually need, those people do not require a number. They already know something more important. They know how you think, how you treat people, what you value, and what kind of integrity you carry. A number does not add to that. It only complicates it. The next thing the shadow discipline requires is protecting your next move. There is a particular kind of person who announces what they are about to do before they do it. I have watched this pattern destroy opportunity after opportunity, not because the person lacked intelligence or capital, but because they needed confirmation before they could commit. They needed someone else to validate the idea before they trusted it themselves. And in seeking that validation, they gave away the edge the idea contained. Good ideas, real opportunities, the kind that create generational wealth, are fragile in their early stages. They require a specific kind of protection, not from the market, but from the weight of other people's opinions. Because the world, by design, is more comfortable with what already exists than with what could exist. The world is organized around the past. Your edge lives in the future. And when you bring a future-oriented idea into a room full of people oriented around the past, the idea almost never survives the encounter intact. The people who told me my best ideas were naive or too early or misguided were often intelligent people. They were not wrong about the risks. They were simply unable to see what I could see from where I was standing. And I learned that instead of trying to bring them to where I was standing, it was more efficient to move quietly in the direction I believed in and let the results speak when they arrived. Results, unlike arguments, do not require persuasion. Results simply exist. And when results exist, even the most skeptical voice in the room goes quiet. I do not announce my next move, not to friends, not to advisors, unless they are bound by fiduciary duty and legal contract to hold the information in confidence. Not to family, certainly not to strangers on the other side of an interview or a social gathering. The announcement of a move creates noise before the move can generate signal. And noise, at the early stage of any important endeavor, is poison. There is a concept in investing that I think applies to all of life, which is that your advantage disappears the moment it becomes common knowledge. When everyone knows a thing, the thing loses its value. This is true of information. It is true of strategies. It is true of positions in markets and positions in life. The edge is always in the gap between what you know and what the crowd knows. Close that gap by broadcasting your knowledge, and you have eliminated the very thing that made you valuable. I have never shared the specific mechanics of how I think about an investment with someone who had competing interests. This sounds obvious, but the number of sophisticated people who violate this principle in the name of being generous or collegial or open is staggering. There is a generosity that builds and there is a generosity that depletes. I believe in the former with everything I have. I give to causes I believe in. I give time and counsel to people I have chosen to mentor. I give resources in ways that create real and lasting change in the world. But I do not give away the instruments of my own success as a form of social performance. That kind of generosity benefits no one in the end because it is not rooted in genuine care. It is rooted in the desire to be seen as generous, which is a very different thing. My edge is mine. I protect it not with aggression, but with silence. The silence of the forest, where the most important things are happening just beneath what the naked eye can see, and where revealing those things to a predator would mean the end of everything they sustain. I want to speak about children now because this is a place where I have thought longer and more carefully than almost any other. The most dangerous gift you can give a child is certainty about money they did not earn. I have watched this destroy more potential than I can count. Not always dramatically, sometimes slowly, quietly, across decades. A child who grows up knowing the inheritance is secured develops a relationship with effort that is fundamentally different from a child who must discover their own capacity. And that difference is not neutral. It does not simply reduce ambition. It hollows something out, something essential to the experience of being human, which is the discovery that you are capable of creating value where none existed before. I believe in giving children roots. I believe in giving them education, exposure, values, and the experience of watching their parents work with integrity towards something meaningful. I believe in giving them a safety net that prevents genuine catastrophe, but I do not believe in giving them a life fully built and waiting for them to simply occupy it. The forest does not grow by shielding its youngest trees from all weather. The youngest trees grow by being exposed to just enough weather to develop strength while being protected from the kind of weather that would destroy them before they can. There is a calibration required, and that calibration is one of the most delicate and important acts of love a parent can perform. When children know the number, when they know exactly what is coming and when, something in their relationship with the present dims. The urgency that creates human greatness requires uncertainty. It requires the pressure of needing to figure something out. Remove that pressure entirely, and you remove the very conditions under which the person can discover who they actually are. I have made choices about this that some people in my life disagreed with. Some still disagree. But I have watched the results across enough time to feel settled in what I believe. A child left with enough to do anything but not enough to do nothing is a child given an extraordinary gift. The gift of their own becoming. Charity is something I feel deeply about. I have given in ways that have changed lives, and I intend to continue doing so until there is nothing left to give. But I have almost never spoken publicly about the specifics of what I have given, and I will tell you why. The moment you announce a charitable act, you change its nature. What was a transfer of resources becomes a performance. And a performance, however well-intentioned, serves the performer as much as it serves the recipient. Often more. I am not interested in credit for the good I do. Credit is a currency for the ego, and I try to keep my ego on a strict budget. But beyond the personal philosophy, there is a practical dimension. When you broadcast your giving, you invite comparison. You invite scrutiny. You invite a conversation about whether you gave enough to the right places in the right ways for the right reasons. You open a door through which all of the world's opinions about wealth and responsibility and obligation can enter. And those opinions are rarely quiet and never fully satisfied. I give. I give seriously and with sustained commitment. But I give in a way that keeps the giving clean of performance, clean of ego, and clean of the social dynamics that broadcast charity almost always creates. The same principle applies to personal pain. There are things that have happened in my life that carry real weight. Losses, mistakes, moments of doubt that stretched longer than I have ever admitted publicly. I have not shared these things broadly because I believe that pain shared broadly becomes entertainment. And my pain is not entertainment. It is mine. It is part of what shaped me. It is not a story I owe anyone. There is a culture now that confuses vulnerability with exposure. Real vulnerability is what happens between two people who trust each other completely. Exposure is what happens when you share your wounds with people who do not yet know your name. One creates genuine connection, the other creates attention. And attention is not the same as connection, no matter how much it can feel that way in the moment. I have shared my difficulties with people who earned that intimacy. That sharing was meaningful. What I have not done is broadcast suffering in search of sympathy from a large and faceless audience, because that kind of sharing does not heal. It performs healing while preventing it. And I have always been more interested in the real thing than in its performance. Let me return to where I began. Fear and what it creates. Every great opportunity I have ever encountered arrived wearing the costume of fear. That is the paradox that most people cannot get past. The thing that looks the most frightening is often the thing that is most mispriced. And a mispriced asset is simply value waiting to be recognized by someone patient and calm enough to see it. The crowd moves away. The opportunity is revealed. But to take it, you must be able to stand still while everything and everyone around you is moving. And standing still in that way requires something that cannot be bought or studied directly. It requires the kind of inner quiet that only comes from having examined yourself honestly, from knowing what you believe and why, from having a relationship with your own thinking that is not dependent on external confirmation. The silent advantage is not intelligence. It is not access to better information, though that helps. It is not capital, though that helps too. The silent advantage is the psychological discipline to act on what you see without needing the world to agree with you first. I have been misunderstood at various points in my life. I have made moves that looked wrong from the outside for long enough that people who were watching gave up and concluded I had been mistaken. And then the results arrived. Not with fanfare, not with vindication. Just quietly, the way real things tend to arrive. I did not feel the need to say I told you so. The result was the statement. And the result was enough. This is what patience truly means. Not waiting passively. Not enduring without purpose. Patience is the active, deliberate choice to let time do the work that urgency cannot. It is the understanding that most of what the world calls speed is actually just anxiety dressed as action. Real movement, the kind that creates lasting results, often looks like stillness to those who do not understand what is happening beneath the surface. I want to close with something that has taken me a very long time to fully understand. The most valuable thing in my life is not a number in an account. It is not a position in a company or a piece of real estate or any asset that can be quantified. The most valuable thing in my life is the freedom to think without noise, to move without announcement, to give without performance, and to live without the weight of other people's expectations sitting on every decision. That freedom was not given to me. It was constructed carefully and deliberately over decades. It was constructed by saying less than I could have said, by moving more slowly than the world wanted me to move, by protecting what was mine not with walls, but with silence, and by understanding that the greatest leverage a person can have in any system is not what they show, but what they withhold. The world will always want more from you than you should give it. It will want your number, your next move, your vulnerability, your secrets, your pain, your plans. It will dress these requests in language that sounds reasonable, even virtuous. It will tell you that openness is strength and that sharing is generosity and that visibility is power. I have found the opposite to be true in almost every situation that mattered. Silence is strength. Restraint is power. And the person who moves through the world revealing only what serves a clear and conscious purpose is the person who retains the one thing that no market can misprice and no crowd can take away: the freedom to choose.